So I think it's fair to say that a lot of people, including myself to a certain extent, have been pretty relieved at the fact that Chris Chibnall is leaving his position as showrunner of Doctor Who. However, we're now a week out from that announcement, and we don't know who's taking over for him yet. Should we be worried about that? Hey there, folks. So I want to kind of talk about something that I am actually a little embarrassed, was a little bit of an oversight on my part when I did the video last week talking about the departure of Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker from Doctor Who as showrunner and the actor portraying the Doctor, respectively. I talked about a number of things, and I laid out a timeline of how these things usually go down in terms of announcements of future Doctors. What I didn't check, and I wish I had, but I didn't, so now we're following up. What I didn't check at the time was what the timeline usually is for announcements of new showrunners. Because, to recap quickly, what I laid out in that previous video, you can see the whole thing there if you haven't already, but what I laid out for that specific thing was basically the timeline of from when David Tennant announced his departure, going through Matt Smith, being announced, when David Tennant actually left the part, when Smith came in, and then the same thing for Smith to Capaldi to Whittaker. And through that, it seems very clear to me that there would be no indication or reason to believe that we will get an announcement on a next Doctor until Series 13 airs. Because that's been the pattern. New Doctors are announced, regardless of when a actor is announced to be leaving the part, the actual new Doctor gets announced after the last full proper series that the outgoing Doctor gets, but before whatever specials are being given to let that actor sign out the part completely. That is when these things happen. But what about new showrunner announcements? How long after the initial announcement that the old showrunner is leaving and who the new showrunner is, what's the time frame on that? How long is it, usually? Now, we've had fewer showrunner turnovers than we have Doctor turnovers, so while I can still point to a pattern, there's only 2 data points as opposed to 3 or 4 in the case of the Doctors, because it's kind of hard to count Eccleston, things were weird. But anyways, back to the original question. How long is that time gap? Usually there isn't one. Up to this point, the next showrunner has been announced at the same time, sometimes in the same press release that announces the departure of the outgoing showrunner. So that's already different from the outgoing Doctor, which has a gap. So the fact that we are now a week away from Chibnall being announced as leaving, and we don't have a successor, what does that mean? Now, first thing to realize, I do not have an inside source. I don't have knowledge that no one else has on this. So everything I'm going to be saying is based off my own deduction, my understanding of the industry, and looking at what I consider to be the most likely causes or reasons or outcomes to all this. Some people can and probably already have spoken with a lot more definitiveness about some of these things. I'm not going to do that. I'll talk about what I think is or isn't likely, but I don't know for certain. No one does. And if they claim they do, then they're either lying to you or they're kidding themselves. So, what does it mean that there's a gap when there's never been one before? Well, most likely the literal thing that it means is no one has been locked in as the new showrunner yet. Does that mean they don't have one? No, not necessarily, but there is a period of contract negotiations, figuring out how long these contracts are for, working out schedules, etc. And all of this stuff has to be signed off and locked in before you start announcing stuff. Because announcing stuff before you've got pen signed to paper, that's how you get things like Universal announcing the Dark Universe and how there was totally going to be a Frankenstein movie starring Javier Bardem, and they were going to have Angelina Jolie be the bride of Frankenstein, and Johnny Depp was going to be the Invisible Man, when nobody had signed anything. They had indicated, like, yeah, sure, if these things move forward, I'm interested, but like nobody was locked, and none of those movies happened. So, and BBC itself has had its own issues with this, even within Doctor Who. Of the many things that appear to have gone on to, and again, I'm going to try not to get into this too much, that have gone on that appeared to rub Christopher Eccleston the wrong way about working on Doctor Who. One of them, and one of the ones we knew about the earliest in terms of being an issue, was the BBC announced his departure early than was agreed upon by Eccleston. So he felt betrayed by them. So you really need to be sure you're on the same page of whoever it is you're going to be announcing, either incoming or outgoing. So again, the point in that whole ramble is just because it hasn't been announced doesn't mean that there isn't one basically locked in, but we're waiting for ink to dry on contracts. That's a possibility. It's also possible that they don't have a next showrunner locked in. So the question then becomes, if that is the case, so again, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying, because it's distinctly possible that they have one basically locked, but contracts aren't finalized. Each day that goes by that we don't have an announcement makes that one less likely, because it shouldn't take too long. So then that brings us to, what if they don't have a replacement candidate yet? Okay, so if that is the case, why would that be the case? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. The first possibility is that they have not whittled down a final determination from a pool of candidates. That may be because perhaps their top choice has a schedule that isn't quite as accommodating, and there's debate at the BBC as to, well, do we shift around the schedule of a show that has had its schedule shift around a lot lately and it has not done anything to help its standing or ratings? Do we shift it around even more to accommodate our preference? Do we go with a second choice who maybe is available right away? So those kinds of things could be stalling a final decision. It's possible that the BBC is still sorting through pitches of what new showrunners want to do. I don't really have the inside knowledge to know how much detail showrunners had to give to the BBC in terms of laying out in advance what they wanted to do with the show. However, I wouldn't be exceptionally surprised if they asked for something like that following Chibnall, even if it wasn't standard up to this point or even through Chibnall, if only because a lot of his decisions were divisive. And if the BBC is afraid of more super divisive decisions, maybe they are doing a bit more vetting on either the showrunners themselves or the ideas that the showrunners say, the potential showrunners say that they want to do. So that's a possibility. I've seen some people float the idea that that the BBC actually intends to put the show on hiatus following the exit of Whittaker and Chibnall. That's the one I think is the least likely. That one makes the least sense to me, because if they are actually planning to do that from the get-go, there really is no reason not to just say that now, because they're not going to do themselves or the show, the property, any benefit by stringing it out and making it seem like there will be more when there isn't going to be. If it's a planned hiatus, it doesn't make a lot of sense to not tell us. It's pretty standard practice of any television entertainment company to say, hey, here's the plan for the next season, or in the case of a show like this with specials, next season and a bit, and that will close out the show. That will be the end. You tell people that at the time so that they can basically know what they're coming into and kind of get emotionally prepared. It's a bit of a courtesy thing, but also it's one less thing to potentially leak later. And I don't pay too much attention to the supposed leaks. I just don't. I don't have and that's not unique to the BBC. I have little interest in leaks because they turn out to be correct so infrequently that I don't like sinking my thinking time or my emotional involvement on leaks. I just don't like doing it. It's a waste most of the time. But the fewer things you are holding as secrets, the fewer issues leaks are going to be. So again, if they're going to put it on hiatus and they delay that announcement, it's going to leak at some point. So they'd be better announcing it now. So I don't think a hiatus is the thing that is planned here. Another reason I don't think that is, no matter what you think of the Chibnall era, and no matter what anybody says about the ratings and where they currently sit at, and or what the ratings for Series 13 are, or whatever else, Doctor Who is too valuable a property for the BBC just to close it down. Because you need to realize Doctor Who is bigger than just the ratings that it gets in the UK, which is generally the only ratings being tracked. Because this is a big deal for the partners of the BBC. They license out Doctor Who. It's one of their bigger properties to do that. When HBO Max was first announced, one of the crown jewels that was announced as something that they acquired and would be airing that wasn't a wholly in-house production was Doctor Who. So this is a big deal, as is the merchandise, the spinoffs, Big Finish. I mean, Big Finish is an independent company and isn't owned by the BBC, but these things, fueling that fire and continuing to fuel it, is in the BBC's best interest. And I think they know that. So that's another reason I don't see a hiatus being planned, or at least not a hiatus of any more than a year, 2 tops. But even that, I don't think that is what they would want to do. So the question then becomes, is the issue that they can't find a showrunner at all? Either they can't find a candidate that they're happy with, or the ones they want don't want to do it. And there are many potential reasons why that might be the case. Again, certain channels and certain pundits, let's go with that term, are going to be quick to say, no one's going to want to come in here and deal with the mess that Chibnall created. I don't think that's the case. I think for any creators, including ones who have worked on Doctor Who previously, who don't want to come in and be the showrunner, there are a litany of reasons why they might not want to do that, and I don't think that accounts for any of them. There is something linked to that might account for it, but I'm going to save that for last. So, it might be they've got their own projects they want to focus on, their own truly original ideas that they would rather be working on promoting. If they haven't worked on Doctor Who for a long time, maybe they don't have ideas to do on Doctor Who. Some of the writers who I have really enjoyed their work on Doctor who I've seen floated as potential showrunners, folks like Toby Whithouse, Paul Cornell, Jamie Matheson, they haven't written on for a varying degree of years, some longer than others. Maybe that's because they haven't been asked. Maybe that's because they just don't feel like writing in that world. And that's not to say they don't still like Doctor Who. You can like something and not feel like writing it right now. So it could be that. It could be if, like I mentioned earlier, if the BBC is putting more oversight on the show than it had before, which, again, purely speculative on my part. But if that is happening, maybe they don't feel like working under those conditions. And somewhat linked to the Chibnall era thing, I would not rule out the possibility that some otherwise viable candidates might be saying no because they don't want to deal with the shit show of angry fans right now. Because let's not pretend that this began and ended with Chibnall. It got worse with Chibnall, but fans were really ripping into Moffat too. And honestly, I've been a fan of this thing long enough that I remember people ripping into Davies towards the end of his run. Now, the scale and scope of it has absolutely changed, but I've said before, when I first got into this show, which was, I started watching it airing, at the time new episodes came out, with Series 4. I was on Doctor Who message boards where I saw people tearing Davies apart with a lot of the kinds of stuff that, well, people complain about Chibnall like he's the first one to do it, complaining about the insertions of what they call diversity characters or political issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I've said this before with other topics, this stuff has always been there, but the amplification has gotten bigger. It got bigger with Moffat, and as the sort of volume, and I don't mean volume as in amount, I mean just loudness of people being driven by certain people on platforms like YouTube and Twitter who drum up anger as part of their brand. As that really pushes harder and harder and harder, it gets louder and it gets more frustrating to deal with, one has to imagine. And as I said, you could see that volume getting turned up on Moffat as his time went on. I would say really kind of starting to crank up during Capaldi's era. It was there a little in Smith. It started getting bad during Capaldi's era, and then Chibnall, it's been full force. Now again, this is not me saying that you are required to like those eras, the Moffat era, the Chibnall era, or that you have to like every episode or every decision creative that those people made. You don't. I'm just saying the people who are being the harshest, who are calling for the harshest things, who are saying the cruelest, most indefensible things at the people responsible for the show, they have gotten louder. I don't honestly think there's more of them than there used to be, but they have gotten louder and they've gotten organized, which amplifies those voices more. And I would not blame any creator, even if they love Doctor Who, even if they think they've got a great idea for Doctor Who, I would not blame any creator who looks at this nonsense, and not even just with Doctor Who looks at stuff like what happened with the new Star Wars trilogy, who looks at all the vitriol thrown at the creators, at the actors, and at multiple of them. Like, people love to crap on Rian Johnson, but then Rise of Skywalker came out, and nobody liked that, and now J.J. Abrams is a huge villain too, whereas before he was seen as the good guy who made a good movie that Johnson script. Like, this vitriol knows no bounds, and it can and will hit anybody. I don't blame anyone who looks at that and goes, no, I don't want to deal with that. Especially knowing that certain stripes of fandom are going to call them cowards who don't listen to fans because they don't address bad faith arguments. It would not be an easy job in a vacuum where social media doesn't exist. But social media does exist. And it is weaponized these days by certain elements of fandom. And that is not something that you could just pretend doesn't exist. It may impact some people, some creators, some writers, actors, etc., harsher than others, either depending on that own person's ability to cope or how much crap gets piled onto them. Because I'm sorry, everyone has their limits. And it would be hard to look at what's gone on with Doctor Who and Doctor Who fandom and not go, me taking up this job is going to put a target on my back, and I don't really want it. So, all this being taken into account, all of these possible factors or possible reasons, should we be worried about the fact that we don't have a new showrunner announced? Not yet, but I would say every week that goes by that we don't have an announcement of a new showrunner, that gives me pause. And it makes me nervous. And again, I don't think there's a planned hiatus. I have a hard time understanding why that would make any sense. But we might find ourselves in a hiatus by default because creators are busy, don't feel like dealing with fandom, don't want to play in this particular universe right now. Who knows? But the longer the delay goes on, the more it starts to feel like, is there nobody who's qualified who wants the job? I don't know. Maybe. Hopefully not. Like, ultimately, I hope that the first thing I said is the reality. That they've got someone, they just need to lock stuff down and finalize it. Or, like, they've got it down to, like, 2 or 3 people and they're just trying to sort out exactly whose schedule lines up best or who had the best pitch or whatever. That's what I hope. Because, and I always say this, whenever I talk about the future of Doctor Who, I want this show to go on forever. There is never reasons to stop it. There is never a reason to reboot it. I would argue that at most, maybe a breather of a little bit, but there is no reason to stop. The show is built to revitalize itself, and it can do that at a regular interval. And I will always want the show to continue, and I will always hope for the best for it, from the performers, from the writers, the directors, everyone. I love this show. And even when I don't like specific episodes or series or arcs or creative decisions, I'm going to keep coming back because I want it to be good and I want to enjoy it. And it has yet to do anything, for me at least, that has made me go, I need to walk away. Is it impossible for it to do that? No, but it hasn't happened yet, and I don't intend to. I love this show. I want it to keep going, and I want what's best for it. I just need to know who's steering this ship, if anybody. So there's my thoughts on the delay in the current situation with the lack of a newly announced showrunner for Doctor Who. What are your thoughts on this? Be civil, please, to me, to Chibnall, to anyone else who you think might take this job, and even to other YouTubers. I know I threw a little shade a little bit, but no personal attacks in the comments. I will delete your comment, and if it's bad enough, I'll just block you from being able to comment. Just don't do it. Don't be a jerk. And I'll try not to be. But if you can keep it civil, whatever your thoughts are, drop them down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon, which is what pays my bills, enables me to do this as my job. Any amount you're able to support is a great help. Don't worry about it, though, because like, share, subscribe also helps me out a great deal if you're not able to support me financially. But even those things, I'm not going to pressure you too much because at the end of the day, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. So until next time, this council is adjourned.